Well, for those who haven't heard, I am becoming Orthodox. Michael Lofton recently did a post, it seems like about me, and I wanted to sort of dispel some like myths about why I'm doing what I'm doing. And really, when it comes down to it, I mean, if there's anybody who's probably had an impact on this decision, it would be Michael Lofton. Michael Lofton made me Orthodox much more than other people. If you really watched his show over several years, he's got a lot of amazing Orthodox scholars on there. And so back in 2015 and 16, I was really diving into a lot of the East-West conversation. I was really happy to discover Reason and Theology. I think back in 2018, ironically, it was Dr. Taylor Marshall and Dr. Timothy Gordon who pointed out the show back then and actually said, hey, this is a great show. I went on there, and then I completely stopped watching Dr. Taylor Marshall at that point and only watched Michael Lofton and Eric Ybarra. And of course, it wasn't primarily them just talking at that time. It was just them having lots of scholarly guests on there. And so that show and bringing in those guests definitely, allowed me to wrestle with these issues at a much deeper scholarly academic level. And so I've got books everywhere. I've been diving into so many journal articles over the last several years. One of my favorite interviews that he had was with Abbot Nicholas. He's not an abbot anymore, but of Holy Resurrection Monastery up in Wisconsin. It's a Eastern Catholic or Byzantine monastery. They even follow the revised Julian calendar, so they haven't celebrated Pascha/Easter yet. They follow it with the Orthodox. But anyways, one of my favorite interviews that he had was actually on Reason and Theology, was with him.
The Catholic Church in Germany, for example, some people are worried at this time that it will go into schism. It's more serious because with respect to the Orthodox, they might not be united, but it's not on matters of faith. It's just on matters of jurisdiction. So we don't really have the full answers.
He admits that Orthodoxy does have a weakness with jurisdictions, Patriarch of Russia, Patriarch of Constantinople going at it, which definitely have culminated in recent years. But they do get resolved. And this is why he's able to say, even though they have weakness in jurisdictions, they have unity in faith, more so than the Roman Catholic world. There is unity of faith. People will talk about how fragmented Orthodoxy is, and yeah, it's got its struggles. I'm not naive, but the unity in faith is the most important thing if you have to decide. And they have a unity in faith, and I think it's unity in reality and truth in apostolic tradition, like the very thing that Christ gave. I think they've done a much better job in holding on to it. One of the biggest reasons is I'm fairly confident what an Orthodox America would look like 100 years from now. But I really don't know what a Roman Catholic America would look like. I think Orthodoxy has a much greater stability about it, in part because of how serious they guard apostolic tradition. And so that's really important. He says, actually, the crisis in the Catholic Church is bigger than the crisis in the Orthodox Church. When you look at Germany, and just look at some of the responses from the Vatican in reference to Germany. Very mixed bag. There's a reason why they were celebrating, Cardinal Fernandez's document that Lofton made, I think, 100 videos over. There's a reason why they're celebrating it. There's a reason why Father James Martin's celebrating that document. And there's a reason why most conservatives were just not. A lot of countries were just openly rejecting it. So that crisis is a crisis of faith, which is a much bigger deal.
Max asks, if the papacy is necessary for the safeguarding of sacred tradition, then how have the Orthodox remained faithful for a millennium without it? It's weird because even Pope Benedict XVI admits to this.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think, that evidence does rather strongly relativize the claim that, you have to be in communion with the Pope or else, you're going to have this kind of doctrinal chaos, or you're going to imperil your salvation. It seems to me that I don't think Catholicism is entirely consistent on this point, because you hear that expressed on the one hand, but on the other hand, Rome very clearly and carefully calls the Orthodox churches, which it calls nobody else, and that means that they have everything necessary unto salvation. And so it seems to me there's a bit of an inconsistency here. You've got to be in communion with the Pope. I mean, look at what something like Boniface VIII said to that effect. But no, the Orthodox, I think, for different reasons, have done, in some cases, a much better job, I would say, of preserving really important things than the West has. And I think that does really force you to consider this argument that the papacy is necessary to keep things from falling apart. I think that's a pretty hard claim to reconcile with the evidence.
Michael Lofton, this is what he said. It is interesting that a content creator who has been overly sympathetic to the dissenters in the Catholic Church. Pretty sure he must be referring to like Eric Ibarra, who I don't really consider to be a huge dissenter. He's just critical of certain perspectives of how to interpret the magisterium of the papacy. But I can almost guarantee you when he says sympathetic to the dissenters, it's Eric Ibarra, because he's primarily the main person I would talk with online. Has now publicly announced he's leaving Catholicism, is going to Eastern Orthodoxy. He goes on, this is why I've written Answering Orthodoxy. Dissenters are ripe for the picking to be sniped off by the Orthodox polemists online. And if I had just read Answering Orthodoxy, it probably wouldn't have happened. Problem is, I've read it. It's pretty light. It's not really geared towards someone like me. Maybe my parishioners in the pews at the church that I was a part of. It'd be a good book for them to read on why not to do what I'm doing. But yeah, I read for the book. It's like Catholic Answers light apologetics. So own it, read it. Yeah, not bad. I mean, I've been following his channel for years, which was significantly more in depth than the book. I mean, I've got Ybarra's papacy book. I even did an interview with him. Great guy. I have the highest respect for him. I do. I obviously don't agree with everything all the conclusions that he comes to, but I like how he sifts through and it has like this investigative spirit. If you want a serious work to like not become Orthodox, well, read this book. But it's kind of expensive. But yeah, I mean, I've worked through this book and worked through lots of scholar books, and I'm still becoming Orthodox. Now, I know you want like a 4-hour video or course on responding to this. That's not happening in this video. I'm just responding to why. Is it the dissenters? Is it because I was listening to too much Dr. Taylor Marshall and Dr. Timothy Gordon? I'm not a trad Catholic. I mean, I'm traditional in the sense of how I grasp apostolic tradition. But you really have to wrestle with the paradigm of the first millennium to really understand that phrase, apostolic tradition. Trads think that like not having the chalice for the laity in the Mass is like better than giving the chalice to the laity, like communing with the blood of Christ. And the Orthodox, they don't go there. They wouldn't have altered that, like what happened in the Catholic Church, in the 13th and 14th centuries. They didn't get rid of, infant communion, chrismation. They don't alter those things. They don't mess with the sacraments like the Roman Catholic Church did. And so trads who say that the Vatican II and the Novus Ordo is just completely innovative, yeah, they make tons of good points, and I would agree with definitely some of them. But they don't really go far back enough to realize that these innovations have been happening for a while now in the West. Again, this does not mean that the Orthodox hasn't had organic change, cultivation, battles. Some people have said, "Oh, he doesn't think Orthodoxy has ever changed." Like Jesus and the apostles gave the church to the fathers, and they just pushed pause. It's like, no, this is a much more in-depth conversation than just Kyle doesn't think they've changed. But I do think that they've been much more faithful into holding on to like what Christ gave to us in the sacraments, in apostolic tradition. The list could go on. Again, a lot of this goes down to the papacy, nature of primacy, and all those things, and we'll get into that not in this video, but down the road, because again, that's more of a course than a 15-minute video. But this is my response to Lofton. I wanted to just do Kyle King on my name, but YouTube already took it a million times over. So I'm a big fan of St. John Cassian, this kind of bridge between the East and the West, deeply influenced Benedictine spirituality and monasticism, but he also came from the East. This is what I wrote. I think he's talking about me at Barrel Age Faith, Michael Lofton. And this is what I said. I read your book a while back, as well as Ybarra's tome on the papacy, and I've interviewed him and have had, read countless other academic works from Catholics and Orthodox over the years. And this goes much deeper than mid-level apologetics. This is what I wrote to another person. This decision had more to do with a theological alignment of views that I've held for many years rather than fleeing the drama of Rome. There's also drama in orthodoxy and wherever human beings live and breathe. So for me, it's about being a person of integrity when I teach the faith to my children first and foremost. The West needs the East. The East needs the West. I'll add that I love the Greek, the Latin, and the Syriac theological traditions. But in the end, my decision ultimately comes down to dogmatics, not being weak to the dissenters. And it comes down to the nature of what apostolic tradition is, not just the smells and the bells. Take care, brother. And I address Michael Lofton directly. I've appreciated your work over the many years. I appreciate you even posting one of my articles on your website last year. Is purgatory above us? You can read that here. If it stays on his website, not sure if it will, which basically runs through the Ariel tradition of testing and challenging and purification happening in particular judgment through the Ariel realm. But we're not getting into all that today, but I'm just saying that's what the article was about, kind of doing this sort of east to west dialogue on the nature of the afterlife in that area. So he posted that for me. And then I said, your book on purgatory, in the book that he's talking about, even strikes a similar sort of theme and sound to how I write about the topic. So I do long for unity, but in the end, I have not arrived at identical conclusions as you, Eric Ybarra. I'm here to be honest and transparent about what I'm doing, but it's not because I saw somebody lighting candles in the church and I was like, oh, I have to be here. No, this has been there for many years, wrestling with dogmatic issues, wrestling with liturgical issues, because liturgy matters.
Liturgical is the most important. As you know, Michael, I don't need to tell you, the liturgical reforms after the Second Vatican Council were dramatic and almost earth-shattering to the life of the church. And I don't think the Western church has recovered, because was it the council? Was it the way the council was interpreted? Who knows? But a tragedy has occurred. In the Eastern Catholic as well as the Eastern Orthodox churches, that shattering has not occurred for all sorts of reasons. And so there's no pre-Vatican II and post-Vatican II really in the Eastern churches to speak of. And so there's greater continuity in all sorts of areas, particularly liturgical worship. The liturgy has changed gradually for 1,500 years in the East. We're not opposed to change, but things are done organically and gradually, and always with the tradition firmly established in the tradition. And the tradition, of course, is a living tradition. It's not a dead tradition. This is a very rich dynamic. Hopefully we'll get the Westerners away from this pre-Vatican II, post-Vatican II mentality, because the faith is not like that. It's much richer, much deeper, much more profound than I'm afraid either of those two groups appreciate, the progressives or the conservatives. They're limiting themselves to the Latin tradition after Vatican II, or even after the Council of Trent. We can help them to really discover the Latin tradition that was before Trent and in the first millennium, to get more in touch with their own roots, which we have in some ways kept more alive, the common roots that we have of the first millennium. I think it's very important in this period of upheaval to the Roman Catholic Church.
Joshua Charles, he was George Bush's speechwriter. Joshua Charles, he posted this a couple days ago. The great Catholic historian Christopher Dawson wrote this when the Western Roman Empire fell. And he says it's the liturgy that kept life together. Doesn't say the papacy, by the way. Of course, our bishops and patriarchs and primates and popes do play a role, but he says the liturgy kept life together. This is what he writes. Whatever else might be lost, and however dark might be the prospects of Western society, the sacred order of the liturgy remained intact, and in it the whole Christian world, Roman, Byzantine, and barbarian, found an inner principle of unity. Moreover, the liturgy was not only the bond of Christian unity, it was also the means by which the mind of the Gentiles and the barbarians was attuned to a new view of life and a new concept of history. And that is Christopher Dawson, Religion and the Rise of Western Culture, Chapter 2, written in 1950. And Joshua really agrees with him. He said this is why many young people today are panting for reverent, otherworldly liturgy. We have the same need today. This is why almost all Catholic influencers either go to Latin Mass, they're Eastern Catholic, so they have the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, or they like someone like Eric Ybarra and a few other guys, they're part of the Anglican Ordinariate. So they have sort of historic liturgies, even though there's still innovations within some of them that I don't agree with, like traditional Latin Mass not having the chalice for the laity, infant chrismation, infant communion being absent as well. But there's a reason why that all the influencers online are in 1 to 2% of the liturgies of the Roman Catholic Church and not your typical Novus Ordo people, because they need stability. They need stability. And Abbot Nicholas agrees. He says it's like a major collapse. I mean, almost devastating to the Roman Catholic world what happened after Vatican II when it came to liturgical overhaul at a major level, okay? So this is not at the level of dogmatics, but it does relate. Orthopraxy is a part of orthodoxy. A good example of this is like the Council of Nicaea too, where the dogma that's accepted at Nicaea too is that icon veneration is good, but it's fused with orthopraxy. And you must venerate icons, like images of the saints. Honor them as your beloved ones. So it's not just the doctrine, but the practice goes along with that, and that's dogmatically binding. Relics and relic veneration, the Holy Eucharist, becoming Christ's body and blood, it can't just be you staring at that all the time. You also have to receive. That's a type of practice. So practice can go along with that. And there's a number of issues that I think have changed in the Roman Catholic world that really were viewed as apostolic tradition that cannot change. And many Eastern Catholics agree with this. I mean, I'm sure Michael Lofton does at some level, but it's hard for me to say what he actually thinks. But the liturgical life is deeply important. You know, if it was just liturgical issues, I don't think that's enough to like leave the Catholic world. I do think there needs to be something related to the dogmatics, how you view apostolic tradition and all that. In my story, when I resigned as a Protestant pastor and knew I wasn't going to be Protestant anymore, I did enter into the Roman Catholic Church, but I was very much open to, at that time, back in 2011, I was very much open to becoming Orthodox as well, and I never shut down that conversation. I never condemned the Orthodox or thought of Roman Catholicism as superior. I really wanted to enter into the apostolic churches. Shoot, if I lived in my town and there had been like a Coptic Orthodox church in the Oriental tradition, if I had had an Assyrian Church of the East, Roman Catholic, Western Rite Orthodox, Eastern Rite Orthodox, Eastern Catholic, you know, if I had like the whole thing like they do kind of like in Pittsburgh, you know, go to Pittsburgh, you got it all. But that's not most of the world. I think there's probably a good chance I wouldn't have become even Roman Catholic back then. I probably would have become Orthodox. So that shapes part of my story, and perhaps I need to ask for forgiveness for leading people astray, but I was not seeking to condemn any of the ancient apostolic churches. I've been pretty open online with people over the last couple years that I never saw myself as a Catholic apologist, but an apologist for the ancient apostolic churches. And I even know that bugs some people. They said, pick a side, do one or the other, but I said, no, all I can do right now is bring people to like the door of the ancient apostolic churches, and then they really need to sift through to decide which one is the best among them. And so that's always been my position. But I really had arrived at a place over the last few years where I was pretty sure I was going to become Orthodox, just didn't know when. If it was going to be, you know, in my 30s, which I don't have much 30s left, approaching 39, or if it was going to happen like, you know, in my 60s or 70s or 80s or something. Sort of like a Father Gabriel Bunge, kind of, he was the student of Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI. He was a Benedictine monk and a patristic scholar, published some great Desert Father works through Ignatius Press, but he became Orthodox. So I didn't know if maybe my journey would be more like him. But I was trying to be patient with my family, and I was employed by the Catholic Church, teaching Catholic theology at a high school, working as a director of catechetical formation at the parish. So I needed to also have a job. I needed to make sure I brought my family along. We were heavily considering Eastern Catholicism for many, many years, as Michael Lofton is. And many great people I know are Eastern Catholics. But for me, I knew that for me to probably have harmony in my mind and heart and practice, that it was going to lead me to Orthodoxy. So that's a little bit of that background there. Yeah, so this is my life. I'm sharing it with you. Appreciate you, whether you're Catholic, Protestant, or Orthodox. I said this in my email today on my Substack at barrelagedfaith.com. Look, I want my life to count for nothing unless I, testify to the gospel of God's grace. For me, that's the heart of the issue, is that I seek to be unified with Christ through prayer, through the sacraments, through his church, and then I share the riches of life in Christ with the world. And I want my whole life to be that, And so that's the most important thing for me. And so for me, it's to be a person of integrity. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I appreciate Michael Lofton. I appreciate a lot of these guys who do speak against orthodoxy, and it's because they think what they hold is true. So I respect that. We don't all come to the same conclusions. And so we'll be talking about that in the future. All right, guys, don't forget to like and subscribe, share this video. We'll talk to you again later on. Bye-bye.